Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for your generous time. And I'm going to take the opportunity to talk to you about OHD and what it means, why we've gone down this track, and where we see the opportunity. So hopefully by the end of it, you'll have some good questions to ask, but you'll also be able to have a much more intimate understanding about what OHD is. So let's talk about Epichem to start off with. Who we are. Jason mentioned that we are a wholly owned subsidiary of PharmAust. We're an Australian-based contract research organisation. We're based in Perth, so we have two purpose-built state-of-the-art laboratories based in Technology Park, not too far away. We're also recognised as a top Australian SME employer of PhD graduates. So if you cast your mind back to why Epichem started 18 years ago, it was to provide two things. One is to meet an unmet need in the marketplace. The second reason was to provide employment opportunities for PhD graduates. Because at the time we were losing our knowledge economy to overseas. We also, some of them became baristas in a cafe and probably more recently Uber drivers in light of the current academic situation we find ourselves in with COVID. And we're also a national and state export award winner, and I'll talk more about that as we go on the presentation. Our expertise has historically been in medicinal chemistry, synthetic chemistry, analytical chemistry, and more importantly, we are often tasked from clients about doing the real difficult chemistry that everyone else has struggled to do. A new area of the business that I set up is an area called material science. So this is the area which OHD falls into, and we'll talk more about how do we use our chemistry capability and extend on our capacity to drive more work in the material science space, predominantly in the resources sector. I think it's a good recipe for if you're specialising in chemistry and you're based in a resource-rich state like Western Australia, if we can get that combination right, I think it's a good recipe for success. And the last point on the slide is about IP generation and protection. So a lot of our clients will come to us to generate IP, but also to protect their IP by tweaking the chemistry so they can go and create new patents as we move forward. Why are we here today? The big problem that we're looking to solve is, I put on the slide there, waste of finite resources, which often ends up in landfill, right? The current technologies that are available are costly, they're labour intensive from a recycling perspective. So we think OHD has an opportunity to be scalable from a recycling perspective and to generate and participate and give back to what we call the circular waste economy with this technology. I'm not going to go through all the steps. You can read them yourself and you've got your presentations in front of you, but I just wanted to highlight this is what the government is doing, both at a federal, state, national perspective around investing energy and money and resources into the waste, into waste and recycling initiatives. And also you'll be aware that Australia's big four banks have specifically announced their commitment to 100% clean energy by 2025, which is not too far away. Okay, from that perspective. So there's a lot of eyes on the technology, and there's a lot of people who've been tasked with how to meet these respective targets moving forward. If I use Western Australia, for example, the West Australian government has not met its waste targets for the last 6 years running. Okay, so there's a big set of eyes on this type of technology moving forward. Okay, well, let's talk about OHD. The fancy name is oxidative hydrothermal dissolution. It's probably the last time I'll use in this presentation, but I just wanted to share with you that that's what it means. It's a very novel, innovative, disruptive technology that converts waste into valuable end-user products in simplicity. Okay, and I'll talk more about that as we go through. So, what is it? So basically, it involves using high temperature, high pressure, water in a liquid phase. So if I take your mind back to the days where we did chemistry, we know that once we boil the kettle, it boils 100 degrees and turns into steam and turns into a gas, right? The secret here is we keep water in the liquid phase. Okay, that's one of the key IPs here, and we use oxygen. So basically, water, oxygen, high temperature, high pressure. That's the conversion we're looking for right here. Okay. And as the slide suggests, conversion macromolecular organic solid, so fancy name for biomass feedstock waste into organic chemicals using just those 4 steps. Okay? So people have enjoyed the discussions I've had with them because overall it's very simplistic technology and it's simpler than some of the other ones that are currently available. Why OHD? Organically for the production of fuels and high-value chemicals and some critical minerals. And we can get this from looking at the conversion of biomass and feedstock, waste, straw, plastics, single-use plastics, rubber tyres to name a few, oil, shale and coal. So for those of you, if I touch on coal for a minute, if I look at our backyard in Collie, the government now has a mandate to find alternative uses or sources for coal. We're quietly confident from the work that we know that we've already undertaken in terms of proof of concept that we can convert coal and make it green by creating biostimulants. And I'll talk more about that as we go through. How big is the pie? Okay, when we look at some of the data around how big is the pie that we're playing in, we're talking about multi-billion-dollar markets in bioplastics, bioethanol, and biostimulants. So we think there's a big demand. A lot of these products have historically had to be purchased from China and other respective markets, and we think there's an opportunity where we can, even if we look at the last 12 months with the current COVID pandemic, we can convert biomass into ethanol. So from a PPE perspective, if the government wanted to actually store ethanol for PPE production, we could do it using some of our biomass technology. I suppose the question on everyone's lips in the room, where do you make money from technology, right? So I'm going to share with you guys that in the organic space, because I'm going to talk about inorganic and e-waste later in the presentation, but from a making money on day one perspective, biostimulants is one group, creating liquid fertilizers is the second, biofuels is the third, and creating fine chemicals is a fourth group that we can currently know with the existing technology. Now, the ones that I haven't put on here, which are probably 5 and 6 respectively, is areas like what we call mineral extraction, and I'll touch on that later on. But we do have the ability, with some of the work we're currently undertaking now with e-waste, to look at tin, lead, copper, platinum, gold, and a series of rare earth metals. Why is rare earth important? Because a lot of those rare earth metals that we will extract from e-waste have the potential to be used in defence, and they'll also be used in electronic and electric reusable technologies. Okay, so we're quite excited by that. Some of the outputs. So we talked about biomass, plastics, tyres, shales, coal. I mentioned before. Organic containing waste streams, and what we're looking at producing are platform chemicals, which I'll talk more about, some liquid fuels, including drop-in fuels, and agricultural biostimulants. So for those of you in the room that aren't familiar with terminology like biostimulants, it's what farmers use to put on their crops for crop yields and crop growth. Okay? So this is the technology that comes out of this as a byproduct. Advantages, as I mentioned, it's technically straightforward and operates at industrial feasible conditions and rates. So one thing that I was excited about was the fact that we can scale up this technology. So we can work with oil and gas and mining clients, and that they can set up a benchtop flow reactor, which I'll touch on in the presentation, on site. So we don't want to be transferring some of these organic materials across countries or across states. They can do it in their own backyard, and I'll show you a specific example in a minute. It uses only water, oxygen, and requires no solvents and catalysts. So if one of the questions you may have in your mind today is how is this different from some of the existing technology, OHD requires no catalysts. So there's no risk that the catalyst will then have to have its own way of getting rid of any byproducts. There's no catalyst in OHD, okay, from that perspective. And obviously, as I mentioned, solvents. So solvents are often a big problem with the current technology, that they need to be removed some way or create a byproduct which is not environmentally friendly. So we talk about high temperature conversion from starting solids. It's environmentally friendly. One thing you may or may not be aware of is OHD is carbon neutral. Right? The minor gaseous product that's produced is mainly CO2, and there's no sulfurs or nitrates produced as a result, so no problematic emissions from the technology. If I look at the conversion rate, just talking about keeping water, we scientifically call it superheated water, but very much it's about how the chemists can keep water at a liquid phase in a benchtop flow reactor system, and the scalability of the technology is in the benchtop flow reactor, that we can scale up to a PDU and then to an industrial size application. Okay. Conversion potential. So obviously the conversion of plastic into renewable fuels. Coal can be converted into diesel, biofuels, liquid fertilizers, and biostimulants. Rubber tyres can be converted into chemical products. Trees can be converted into ethanol and fine chemicals, as we touched on earlier. And if there's any leftover crops or stocks, depending on what is in those products, they can be converted into agricultural biostimulants or cellulosic ethanol. And this is an example, guys, of a PDU unit, proof of concept already, that we have in the US, okay, where we've already built from a benchtop to a PDU unit, and the next step after this is to scale up, depends on the client requirements from that perspective. So this is a roadmap I thought I'd share with you guys just to illustrate how the technology works. So very much you put in your feedstock or your biomass, it gets mixed in with water and becomes a slurry. Okay, it then goes through the OHD flow reactor. We add in the oxygen and the water, and then it forms two things: either a raw liquor that's then used to become a biostimulant, and then we can play with the concentration and separation, and then there might be an outlay of a product, a solid at the end of it.
Colin, can I just ask a question when you've got that slide up?
Sure.
In terms of the feedstocks, are there many things that cannot go into the feedstock, or are you saying just about anything that goes to the council landfills can be put into that?
So the answer is anything can be put into it. Our license is extremely broad, so we've negotiated a very broad license with Thermoquatica to actually have the most broadest feedstock and biomass license possible across a series of territories. But to answer your question, we've done a lot of work predominantly in coal and what we call in-plant matter. The excitement for the chemistry team at Epichem is to test a lot of things that haven't been tested yet. But to answer your question, any biomass can go in there. It just depends what comes out the other end. In terms of, there'll be some products that will come out the other end that will have no market value. There'll be those that will have revenue stream generation as a result as well. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Colin, just to follow up on that, do you have a preference on feedstock?
Do we have a preference?
Yeah.
At this stage, we don't have a preference. It's a good question. We don't have a preference because we want to test everything to know what works and what doesn't. Okay, initially. But if you told me, I've got black coal from Collie samples, I've got brown coal from Victoria. So if I give you an example, at the moment, Victoria is sitting on what I call a gold mine. It's brown coal, it has no value, has no import capability. But if they could extract brown coal and run it through OHD and see whether it develops a series of end user products, fine chemicals, minerals, all of a sudden they have a new revenue stream. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of, I'm going to touch on two things here, biomass feedstocks and non-biomass feedstocks, okay? So the first of all, some of the feedstocks we talk about is wood, energy crops, agricultural wastes, wheat, canola, so forth. So I had, when the Chinese were not playing nicely with Australian farmers around the grains, I had the Grain Research Institute contact me and say, can we run this through OHD to see whether it converts something? At least we can give something back to the farmers around revenue streams for their hard work and blood, sweat and tears when it was all pretty precarious there for a while with the Chinese. Okay, so these are some of the things that we're in discussion with. Municipal waste, to answer your question, Cam, from that perspective, and then other waste streams. So what do we get? So we get bioethanols. We can get hydrogen production, so biohydrogen. I know hydrogen and lithium are hot topics at the moment. So for us, from the point of view is, with anaerobic fermentation, there is an opportunity for us to create biohydrogen with this technology. And then we can use a series of food sources for microbes or insects, and what we call biorefinery. Could be one of the outcomes. And then we're going to be able to provide platinum chemicals like green and biodegradable plastics and polymers, green renewable fine chemicals, and then, as I mentioned earlier, agricultural biostimulants, which is predominantly used in the ag tech and farming space. Okay, farmers have been using this for years. Most of it gets imported from China. They apply it to their crops. They get better crop yields and faster growing crops as well. Now to the non-biomass. So this is the coal. the shale, the bituminous sands, even things like single-use plastics, synthetic wastes, other waste streams, which I'll touch on in a moment. And some of the products we'll get is fine chemicals, biostimulants, and liquid fuels, to name a few. And there's also the potential for us to upgrade, example, by hydrogenation to high energy liquid fuels as well. So, and there's synergy with existing synthetic fuels and related technologies. So our role here is to convert biomass into diesel, right? That's where our technology and where our sweet spot is. Someone else will then take that diesel, have to refine that diesel before it goes into our cars. Okay? So that's just to give you to give you transparency across that process. In the presentation, I've touched a few times on platform chemicals and what they are. So I won't get too technical, but it's what we call building blocks for converting high-value chemicals or materials, right? So you need platform chemicals to allow you to complete that process. We looked at products that derive from cellulose, can be fermented and converted to drop-in fuels. We have a client at the moment, we've had them for 4 years. We have developed the method development and consultancy capability to convert microbial waste into cellulose for fabrics and textiles, for example. So we have that material science technology already. Organic acids are derived from certain plastics. They make excellent platform. And then we use raw mixtures and feedstocks, which are also very, very suitable. If I look at custom synthesis, this is to give an example. I wanted to share with you guys that we have had experience in doing what's called hydrometallurgy. So apart from the work that we're currently doing in the space around OHD and using biomass and feedstock conversion, is there an opportunity for us to mineral extraction? Okay, so this is a slide I wanted to share with you guys today to show you that we have done, and we've already got some runs on the board around some work we've done around hydrometallurgy already, all right, from that perspective. So, this talks about being experts in organic chemistry, sample testing, degradation studies we've done, comprehensive analytical capability. We have a full analytical chemistry team at Epichem, and we've got some state-of-the-art technology to allow us to do it. So, one of the exciting spaces for me is can OHD be used in innovation and mineral processing? So, we want to explore the direct leaching and extraction of mineral ores, the pre-treatment of refractory ores, and other recovery refinery processes. So I'm working with the Murdoch University, the Department of Minerals, on this project, and they've decided to partner with us to test a series of things, including using the end user products for mineral extraction, step one. Step two is to see whether we can use this technology to look at things like gold and ore extraction moving forward. Okay, the chemistry team at Epichem is quietly confident that it does have a place in that space. Okay, and we're looking at related high pressure oxidation and pressure leaching. And then we also asked ourselves the question: what does the absence of a gas phase have on the process? Because currently, if you look at gold, the gold standard is cyanide, right? Is there another option with this technology that we could apply that's non-gas specific? Okay. Some highlights to share with you guys. We already have proof of concept, so we've already done some work with coal, and we've done some work with what we call plant matter, lignocellulosic biomass. So those areas were tested in the US. Initially, the technology was bankrolled by the coal industry. The chemists there did nothing more than just focus on coal and plant material, and that's where it stopped. And I think that's where there's an exciting opportunity for Epichem to take that forward as a technology. Some external outcomes that we think we can achieve is the removal of organic waste. So if you look at, we have a client at the moment that's got 3 major dams in Tasmania. They're talking to us about fume dam mud, and they need to remove it and convert it from a liability into an asset if we can. So there's going to be 3 buckets, I think, of clients. First up, the first bucket is they just want to get their organic waste to make it go away. The second bucket will be the conversion of organic waste into valuable end-user products based on what the biomass and feedstock is. And the third benefit is we'll make sure that it doesn't end up in landfill. Okay. And obviously converting that liability into an asset for one of these clients that I'm talking about in Tasmania is huge, because at some stage they're going to run out of space, and going to have to decommission their site. So we've just taken ownership of 50 kilos of their product, and we're going to test it through OHD and hopefully come back with some data that they can then use to make some decisions moving forward. The internal validation for us is, I've often touched in this presentation around organic. I haven't touched on inorganic, so we're quite excited about that, about testing some inorganic products. For some of you who do follow Epichem and PharmAust, you'll be aware that we've recently won a $200,000 grant from the government around the waste sorted e-waste grant. So we are in partnership with a series of players at the moment. We're going to test a series of e-waste through our OHD technology using the flow reactor. So the beauty of that is very much seeing the conversion of plastics and certain parts in e-waste and see what the conversion factor is there. IP generation. So if there's any IP generation in the organic space, we're going to have to share it with Thermoquatica. If there's any IP in the inorganic and e-waste space, it's all PharmAust and Epichem. Okay, so we're quite excited about the generation of IP, but also the protection of that IP moving forward. As I mentioned earlier, in answering one of the questions, we have a very broad biomass feedstock license that we've secured with Thermoquatica. It's probably it can't get any wider, to be honest. It's extremely wide, and we purposely, strategically did that. And we had to we focused on trying to get the largest width of biomass feedstock rather than trying to focus on too many countries. Okay, from that perspective. And our current license agreement covers Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan. Okay, so these are the countries we've already licensed through from that perspective. I'll just wrap up by saying, look, I think we bat above our average. For those of you, Epichem has had a relationship with DNDi, which stands for Drugs for Neglected Disease Initiative, for 13 consecutive years. It's been worth about $50 million worth of revenue to Epichem during that time. And last year alone, my chemistry team delivered more than 500 compounds for the client. So exciting space in the medicinal chemistry space. We've now added OHD. We see this as nothing more than an extension of our chemistry capability in material science. And as I mentioned earlier, I think the marriage between chemistry and resources is where we think OHD can play. And we already have some mining clients that are keen to test this technology with some of their organic waste compounds and mountains of waste that they have. I mentioned about the e-waste grant. We have 200K that allows us to build the benchtop flow reactor, and then we can start playing with it. The chemists are super excited about being able to play with a series of biomass and feedstock moving forward, and seeing what can be eventuated or created as a result of this technology. And you'll be happy to know that we are the recipient of a number of awards. And so I'll just finish by saying, in 2019 we won the WA Export of the Year Award for International Health. In 2020 we were the WA nomination, the only WA nomination for Austrade, and we also were recognised last year in a year that was difficult for everyone around the global health and pharmaceutical biotech sector as well, for both Australian Chemistry Service Provider and Best on Organic Chemistry Solutions. So with that, I just want to say thank you very much for your time, and happy to take any questions.